These are the Sennheiser Momentum 5, and I think these should make the big guys like Sony and Apple kind of worried. Let's get the box open and see what is inside. Probably headphones. They have a nice and thin case, at least compared to some of their previous headphones, like the HDB 630. We have some user documentation in the bottom. Interesting. Well, these have like a nice little indent on the back, saving just a tiny bit of space in my backpack, I guess. On the inside, we have a tasty treat. There is a charging and USB audio cable. If I had to go by my optical calipers, I'd say that's maybe 1.2 meters. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And
exactly 1.2. It's a 1.2 for sure. Confirmed.
What I tell you, optical calipers are calibrated. We also have a 3.5 millimeter to
2.5 millimeter
1.2 meter cable in case you want to go analog with your audio. And then the only thing left in the case is the headphones. Now, I have to be honest, I put these stickers back on here because I've been using these headphones. I actually took these on a 17-hour flight to Singapore and then a 14.5-hour flight back. And the battery lasted the whole way, both ways. This colorway is called Denim. They have capacitive touch controls, these little silver microphones all the way around, and they claim that the microphones on these are notably improved from the previous gen. Now I also have the Momentum 4 and the HDB 630 here, and you'll notice from the top, they changed the way this logo is presented on the side, though I do think it looks pretty decent. Same old adjustment mechanism you get on the rest, this smooth sliding that locks a bit more into place when the headphone is under tension, plenty of padding on top with a divot in the middle, and relatively spacious ear cups measuring in at about 43 millimeters wide, 60 millimeters tall, and 33 deep. These are also a little bit deeper on the inside. Now, whether you like it or not, these do have capacitive touch controls on the side, so double tap for going between transparency mode, which actually is a pretty decent transparency mode, and noise canceling, which again, actually really good noise canceling. In my opinion, this rivals things like the AirPods Max and beats out things like the Sony WH-1000 XM6 or WH-1000 X Collection. Now, we've got a power button right here that also doubles as your pairing button if you hold it. We've got a USB-C port for charging and also for digital audio input. And then, of course, if you want to go analog wired, there's an input for that too. Comfort-wise, I'm pretty happy with them. Again, I was able to wear these for a 17-hour flight pretty much the entire time. I maybe took them off for half an hour to eat, but that's really it. Just like the Momentum 4s and the HDB 630, I find these to be very comfortable. And speaking of comfort, it helps that they're only around 290 grams. Let's compare that to the 388 grams on the AirPods Max, or the 253 grams on the WH-1000 XM6. And that does make the XM6 a little bit lighter, but the XM6 also doesn't really have top padding, and that goes a long way when you're wearing something for hours and hours. And there's one more thing about these headphones I want to mention real quick, and it may be the single most important thing about them, and that is that you can use one Phillips head screwdriver, maybe one from lttstore.com, and you can replace the battery yourself. I wish every Bluetooth headphone had this, because if you can't replace the battery on your Bluetooth headphones, they're basically just e-waste. They are eventually going to stop working, and what are you gonna do? Are you just gonna use them wired forever, or are you gonna let there just be a little spicy pillow in there? Probably not. You're probably just gonna toss them out and replace them with the next new thing. I think the battery might be in the other side. I think I took apart the wrong side. But look, we get to see this cool little planet right here. Isn't that a nice little Easter egg? Okay, let's put the screws back in, then let's open up the correct ear. Okay, I've got the screws out, and look at that. There's our battery right there. Nice little connector. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. This is actually like maybe the easiest it's ever been for me to open up a headphone before. God, this is actually beautiful. I love this. Why doesn't everyone do this? But all that said, what I really care about is how they sound, which I'm gonna talk about with FedEx.
You're like a dog with the mailman.
I feel such a need to run after the FedEx truck and bark. But society says I can't do that. Now, all that said, what I really care about is sound, and that is what makes or breaks a headphone for me at the end of the day. So we're gonna talk about that with science right after we talk about our sponsor.
A good computer case is like the dough around the delicious jelly filling that is your computer. And MSI's Maestro 900R is looking positively scrumptious. It's so much more than just a gorgeous golden brown shell though. The Maestro has triple-sided panoramic glass, can support dual GPUs, and up to 14 fans to keep your computer as cool as a cruller. My favorite. Let the world be jealous of that jelly by grabbing your MSI Maestro 300R at our link below.
You know, this thing weighs like a solid 25 pounds. You could just... Now, this is how we test headphones. We put them on this guy. On another test fixture, we crunch down all that data and build a map of how these might sound on my head or on yours. He also has a working mouth and it can scream.
What do you mean it can scream?
It can scream. Look at this sophisticated fella, and look at this gray zone right here. This gray zone represents the average listener preference. If it falls somewhere within this area, it means that the average person will perceive this headphone as having higher sound quality, and it's actually a pretty wide range. On the very low end here, we have our deep sub bass. Right above that, we have our bass going into the low mid range where you perceive kick and warmth and richness in your music. There's the mids here. This is where most of your music lives. Right above that is the upper mid-range lower treble. This is where you're mostly going to find female vocals or the upper end of male vocals. And then way up here is all of your treble. That's where the sizzle and the hiss and the sounds all live. Now you'll notice on the low end, these have a pretty hefty amount of deep sub bass above the bounds. This is gonna be really down into the rumbling ranges. Above that, the bass into the low mid range is actually really good. It's a little bit on the warm side, so these will sound a bit more rich in the low mids. In the mid-range right here around 800 to 900 hertz, we start to dip in a little bit, and it's really going to depend from there on how your head reacts with these headphones, because with some heads, you'll end up getting a bump right here. With some heads, you'll end up being a bit more flat. And if you're a bit more flat, you're probably not as likely to notice this dip, but if you have a bump right here, you probably will. What this bump will do if you get it is it'll probably make these headphones sound a bit more forward in vocals. Vocals may be a bit more present or a bit more clear, but that could also be a bad thing depending on your preferences. Luckily, it is all within the bounds, except for right after that, where it starts to dip down. Now this dip isn't massive, but it is enough that, again, with some things you may notice it. Right after that, the treble is pretty linear up until around 8 kilohertz, and then we start to get a bit of elevation right here. That elevation does go up outside of the bounds, and with some things it's going to make them sound a bit more sizzly, a bit more hissy, and sometimes you can get sibilance out of them, which is where S sounds are a bit too harsh. Now this dip is pretty close to right here. This is the most sensitive part of human hearing for the average person, but on some people, it might be right here. What this essentially means is that the most sensitive part of your hearing is going to be, well, a little bit de-emphasized. This may result as music being a little bit less harsh, or it may result in some instruments and some sounds being slightly more nasal. It just depends on how your head interacts with it and what music you're listening to. Luckily, the dip is relatively narrow. I'd be a lot more worried if the dip was wider, like it is on something, say, the Momentum 4s or the AirPods Max, where it's a bit more like this. But the dip being this narrow, it's not optimal, but it's also not the end of the world. All things considered, we have a pretty linear overall response with a lot of sub bass in the lows. Now, these do have EQ in their app. That can help, and you can pull this down pretty easily so the sub bass is within the bounds, if not on the upper end. But the EQ is not parametric. What this essentially means is you are stuck with the bands they give you, and if you want to adjust, say, this specific frequency, too bad. You're just going to be adjusting something roughly in this range instead of very specific targeted zones. For me, I'm definitely on the lower end of the bumps that you get for these in the upper mid-range lower treble, and I find them to sound pretty dang good. They work well with my HRTF. By the way, HRTF means head-related transfer function. It's how my ears or your ears measure, and they're all going to be a little bit different. They sound smooth, they sound rich, and while I do pull the bass down a little bit, the best way I could really describe the sound is full and inoffensive. It's easy to listen to for a long time. It sounds spacious, it sounds separated, and it's close to exactly what I would be wanting out of a headphone like this. I would love it a little bit more if I had parametric EQ though. Let me give you back this real quick so you look nice. Now, I can't help but find it odd they didn't include parametric EQ because the HDB 630, a headphone they released not that long ago, does have parametric EQ in the same app. And some other headphones, like the Nothing Headphone 1, also have parametric EQ in their app. This is a pretty simple software feature that realistically any headphone should have at this point. So here in the app we have control over the adaptive noise control. You can set how much ANC or transparency you want if you want wind reduction on, but you can also toggle things like Dolby Atmos, which actually can be nice if the tracks support it. If they don't, I personally prefer spatialized audio features to be turned off. Here is that EQ that left me sort of wanting. As you can see, I can fix the sub bass, but 8 kilohertz is nowhere to be found. I can adjust 7 kilohertz or I can adjust 12. That just seems a little silly. Let me have parametric EQ at this point. We can also change how it prioritizes different audio modes, whether it be bitrate and sample rate, or the codecs we're using. So these support SBC, AAC, aptX, aptX Adaptive, aptX HD, and aptX Lossless. You can change the auto power off, this and that and that. I feel like these are all some pretty standard features for Bluetooth headphones these days. Versus here in the exact same app is the HTB630. Look at this. I can adjust frequency, I can adjust gain, I can adjust Q factor, I can put on different type of shelf filters, and I can just keep adding filters to this to make these sound like whatever headphone I want. Give me this in everything. My life would be so much easier. I could just recommend things if they just had good ANC and good comfort, then you could just EQ it to be good. Ugh. Anyway, let's see how the microphone sounds. Now, the headphone microphones, they are notably improved over the Momentum 4 and the HTB630, though, let's be honest, it is very obviously still a set of beamforming microphones. Nothing really revolutionary happening there, but an improvement is an improvement, and I welcome it. You know what? Let's see how good these microphones are when they have to deal with noise rejection. I've got my vacuum running right next to my head, and let's say I want to talk about how nice it is right now in June. It's actually not. I live in the Pacific Northwest. It's always raining. Oh, you can definitely hear the vacuum running, though. Yeah, the mics are improved, but the AirPod microphones, at least for speaking on a call, are going to cancel out a vacuum cleaner better than these are. That said, the noise canceling on these is pretty insane. In fact, I feel like overall these headphones are so dang good that if we just had parametric EQ, it would be my go-to recommendation. And that's kind of where these sit. For a lot of people, I do strongly recommend the Momentum 5, and I personally am using them a lot. The ANC is crazy, the battery life is crazy. These have some pretty good fast charging, though it takes about 2 hours to charge them to full, but at full, they last for 57 hours. It's worth noting that is their claimed battery life. Of course, your use case may vary wildly from that, though at least for my traveling, again, 17-hour flight, a week in another country, and then 14 and a half hours back, I did not charge these on that entire trip. So where do these sit at $399 USD? Well, I think they're notably better than the Momentum 4s. I think that they're definitely an upgrade in terms of noise canceling and microphone quality over the HTB630, though lacking in terms of parametric EQ by comparison. They're definitely better sounding and more comfortable than the WH-1000 XM6 from Sony. They have better noise canceling, better microphones, and better comfort than the Nothing Headphone 1, though the Nothings have better EQ. And I can't really think of any use case scenario besides maybe Apple's easy pairing or the microphone call quality that I would prefer the AirPods Max for. So, I guess I like these. In fact, I like them so much that I wore them again. Still, it's like a month later since we filmed that. And right now, I'm at Open Sauce. And I'm getting a burger. Subscribe to Short Circuit.